The stars shone brightly as the human expedition ship, Endeavour, glided silently through the uncharted void of the galaxy. Captain Clara Donovan sat in her command chair, her eyes fixed on the star map in front of her. For weeks, they had been following a strange signal that seemed to pulse in and out of existence. The coordinates had led them to a barren, ice-cold planet, far from any known trade routes, a world so remote that it had no name, no history, no significance. Until now. "Captain, we've arrived," came the voice of Lieutenant Felix, his tone filled with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "We're orbiting the planet." Clara nodded, her gaze never leaving the console. The coordinates had led them here, to a planet that seemed to be nothing more than a frozen wasteland. The signal was weak, yet persistent, like an ancient call buried deep beneath the surface. "Begin the descent. Let's see if we can find the source." The crew of the Endeavour prepared to land, unaware of the secrets that lay beneath the ice. As they descended, the planet's surface appeared desolate, nothing but endless fields of white and gray, scarred by deep cracks that hinted at something ancient beneath. As the ship touched down, Clara's heart raced. The signal had led them here for a reason. But what was it? The team, consisting of geologists, engineers, and historians, gathered their gear and made their way to the surface. The cold was biting, a chill that cut through even the thickest of their thermal suits. But Clara felt something else too, a sense of unease that prickled the back of her neck. The air was still, unnervingly so. No birds, no wind, no sign of life. Nothing. They trekked for hours, their steps crunching through the frozen landscape as they followed the signal's faint pulse. Then, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, they saw it. Rising from the ice like a forgotten monument to a lost era, a massive structure emerged from the ground. A city, but not like anything they had ever seen. The architecture was unlike any human design, its jagged alien shapes sculpted into towering spires that seemed to defy logic. Ancient, weathered stone and metal blended seamlessly, as though the city had been grown rather than built. Is this real?" whispered Dr. Eliza Grant, the historian on the team. Her voice trembled as she approached the city's entrance, her eyes wide with disbelief. "It's real," Clara answered, though her own words carried a weight of uncertainty. "But what is it?" They entered the city through a massive archway, the symbols etched into the stone glowing faintly under their flashlight beams. The walls were adorned with images of strange creatures, beings with elongated limbs, eyes that seemed to glow, and faces that were eerily human, yet not. It was as though this city had once been inhabited by a race that existed on the very edge of reality itself. "Look at this," said Felix, his voice breaking the heavy silence. He had found a control panel embedded into the wall. The screen flickered to life as he touched it, showing indecipherable symbols that danced across the surface. The technology was advanced, but clearly ancient, far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. As the crew gathered around, a strange hum filled the air, followed by a sudden burst of energy that flickered through the walls. A low, guttural sound echoed from deep within the city, like the awakening of something long dormant. Clara's pulse quickened. What the hell was that? Before anyone could answer, the ground trembled beneath their feet. The city, no, the entire planet, seemed to be alive, shifting, responding to their presence. And then a voice, a whisper, echoed in Clara's mind. "You should not have come." It was a voice not heard, but felt, reverberating through her very bones. Her eyes widened in shock, and she turned to the others. Did anyone else hear that? The crew exchanged uneasy glances, and as they nodded in disbelief, a chill of terror swept over them. They were not alone. The hum of the city grew louder, almost rhythmic, as if something deep within its structure was stirring. Clara's breath quickened, her heart racing as the strange voice echoed again, this time more forcefully, but still only in their minds. "You should not have come." "Who, or what is that?" Felix's voice trembled as he glanced around, his fingers gripping his weapon tighter. There was no one there, no sign of life, nothing except the eerily silent ruins. Clara swallowed hard, her instincts screaming at her to leave, to turn back. But the signal, so persistent and enigmatic, was still guiding them forward. She couldn't ignore it. They had to press on. "Stay sharp," she ordered, her voice steady despite the knot of fear twisting in her stomach. "We keep moving." The crew continued deeper into the city, following the faint pulse of energy that now seemed to resonate from the very heart of the ruins. The air grew thicker with each step, charged with static, as if the city itself was waking, preparing for something. As they passed through a colossal archway, the temperature dropped sharply. Clara could see her breath forming in the freezing air. The walls, which had been dormant for eons, now hummed with faint light as strange patterns began to form across them. Symbols that seemed to move, shift, and rearrange themselves as they walked past. "Look at this," said Dr. Grant, her voice filled with awe and dread. She knelt to examine a series of symbols that glowed more brightly the closer she got. "These aren't just words. These are warnings, I think. They speak of an ancient order, a race of beings who created these Sentinels to protect them." "Protect them from what?" Felix asked, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "From invaders, it seems," she murmured. "From a threat far beyond anything we could imagine." Before Clara could respond, the ground beneath them suddenly trembled. A low, grinding noise reverberated through the air, coming from somewhere deep within the city. The hum intensified, now joined by a series of mechanical clicks and metallic groans. Clara's mind raced as the strange feeling of being watched swept over her again. Without warning, a massive door in front of them groaned open. It wasn't a door at all, but a giant vault, a circular opening that led into a vast, cavernous chamber. A heavy mist spilled out, swirling like fog around their feet. "Get ready," Clara warned, her hand instinctively reaching for her sidearm. The others followed suit, weapons drawn as they cautiously stepped into the chamber. The mist parted as they moved forward, revealing towering figures, tall, imposing, and draped in ancient armor. They were humanoid in shape, but their faces were obscured by helmets that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. Their eyes glowed faintly, pulsing with an otherworldly light, and their bodies shimmered like ghosts, both solid and ethereal at once. "Who are they?" whispered Felix, his voice barely audible. The answer came from the same haunting whisper that had invaded their minds earlier. "We are the Sentinels, and we protect this world." Clara's breath caught in her throat as the realization hit her like a shockwave. These weren't just statues or relics. These were the Sentinels, the guardians of this forgotten world, their purpose embedded into their very existence. But the question remained, why had they remained dormant for so long? And why now? The figure in the center, the largest of the Sentinels, stepped forward. Its armor gleamed in the dim light as it spoke, its voice echoing with a strange resonance that vibrated in their bones. "Intruders," it said, "you have disturbed the balance. You are not meant to be here." Clara's heart raced. "We're not enemies. We came to investigate." The Sentinel's eyes glowed brighter, and it raised its hand in a gesture that seemed both menacing and protective. "You will leave now, or you will face the consequences." The ground trembled again, and a massive surge of energy rippled through the room. It was a warning, a threat. The Sentinels were not just protectors. They were weapons, capable of far more than anyone had anticipated. As the crew stood frozen, the voice in Clara's mind spoke once more urgent this time. "You have awakened us. Now you must face the consequences of your actions." Clara looked around, her mind racing. They had come to find answers, but now it seemed they had unearthed something far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. The Sentinels were not just relics. They were the last line of defense against something far darker, something that was now closing in. And they were standing in its way. The tension in the chamber was suffocating. The Sentinels, their forms flickering between solid and translucent, loomed over the humans like specters of an ancient war. Clara's mind raced as she tried to process what was happening. The Sentinels had made it clear they were no allies. They were protectors, programmed to defend the world at all costs, and the humans were now intruders. "You need to leave," the largest Sentinel repeated, its voice echoing across the chamber, resonating in Clara's bones. "This world is no place for you. The balance has been disturbed." Clara swallowed, forcing herself to stay calm. "We didn't mean to cause harm. We're explorers, researchers, looking for answers." She paused, glancing at her team. "Please, tell us what happened here. What happened to your creators?" The Sentinel's gaze shifted slightly, its glowing eyes dimming, as if considering her words. But the silence that followed was thick and oppressive. The answer didn't come in words. Instead, it came as a tremor, a subtle vibration in the air that spread outward from the walls and floor. Clara's heart skipped a beat. Suddenly, the chamber's massive doors slammed shut, the sound of grinding metal reverberating throughout the structure. The mist swirled around them, becoming denser. The temperature dropped further, and the very air seemed to crackle with energy. The Sentinels stood still, as though awaiting something. Clara's team exchanged uneasy glances, each person feeling the growing weight of their surroundings. It was as if the city itself was alive, reacting to their presence, reacting to the awakening of the Sentinels. "Something's wrong," whispered Dr. Grant, her voice tense. Before anyone could respond, the ground trembled violently, and a blinding light erupted from the chamber center. The air shimmered with the intensity of the energy, and a low hum filled the space, growing louder by the second. Clara instinctively raised her weapon, but the Sentinels didn't react. Instead, the largest of them turned its head toward the ceiling. It raised a hand in a slow, deliberate motion, and the mist began to swirl upward, revealing a massive viewport overhead. Through the fog glass, the explorers saw a dark shape in the sky. A massive fleet of ships, each far larger than anything humanity had ever encountered. Their dark silhouettes cast a shadow over the planet, blocking out the faint stars. The conquerors had arrived. That's not possible," Felix gasped, his voice barely audible. "How could they be here already?" The Sentinels turned as one, their glowing eyes now focused on the distant fleet. The calmness of their movements belied the urgency of the situation. "The invaders have returned," the largest Sentinel intoned, its voice carrying a grave finality. "The eternal war has begun again. We were meant to stop them, but we failed." Clara's heart sank. She had assumed the planet's history was lost, buried in the ruins. But now she understood. The Sentinels weren't just relics of a forgotten civilization. They were the last line of defense against an empire that had ravaged their creator's world, and the invaders, having been dormant for centuries, were now rising once more. "We can't fight them alone," Clara said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to remain composed. "We need to work together." The Sentinel's eyes narrowed. "You are not prepared." It raised a hand, and the energy in the room surged violently, throwing the humans off their feet. Clara gasped for breath as the force of the power overwhelmed her senses. But the words from the Sentinel echoed in her mind, not just spoken but felt. "The conquerors will not be stopped. Their fleet is unstoppable. They seek what we fail to protect." The reality of the situation hit Clara like a hammer. The humans had awakened the Sentinels, yes, but they were too late. The invaders were already here, and if the conquerors succeeded in their mission, the galaxy would fall. The Sentinels' ancient defense systems, long dormant, had failed in the past. The humans might be the last hope. "We may not be ready," Clara whispered, as she looked at her team and then back at the towering Sentinels. "But we have no choice. We have to stop them." The Sentinel stared at her for a long moment, its ghostly form flickering in the dim light. Then, with a slow and deliberate motion, it nodded. "Very well. You will fight with us." The chamber's walls groaned as energy surged through the ancient city. The Sentinels' forms began to solidify, their armor gleaming with a terrifying glow. Clara's heart raced as she understood the magnitude of what was coming. They were about to face an enemy unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. The Conquerors were back, and the eternal conquest was about to begin. The air crackled with electricity as the Endeavor's crew, joined now by the newly awakened Sentinels, gathered on the outskirts of the city's central hub. The sky above was cloaked in the shadow of the Conqueror fleet, its dark ships forming a menacing ring around the planet. The Sentinels, once ancient and immobile, now stood as towering figures of power, silent, almost statuesque, yet brimming with a palpable energy that seemed to hum in the air around them. They had agreed to fight alongside the humans, but there was a sense of urgency that none of them could ignore. "We can't just wait for them to land," Clara said, her voice sharp as she turned to face the others. "We have to hit them before they can deploy their ground forces. If they take control of the planet, we'll never get a chance to stop them." Dr. Grant nodded, eyes wide with a mix of awe and terror as she studied the Sentinels. "We need to understand how they fight," she said, her voice tremulous but determined. "These are weapons, yes, but we don't know their full capabilities." "We don't have time to wait for answers," Felix added, scanning the horizon as the first waves of Conqueror ships began to break through the atmosphere. "They're already here." The Sentinels, seemingly acknowledging the urgency of the situation, began to move. Their feet made no sound as they shifted, their forms flickering between solidity and translucence. The largest Sentinel, who had spoken to Clara before, stepped forward, its voice reverberating with power. "We will protect you," it said, its glowing eyes locking onto Clara. "But you must aid us in this battle." Clara felt the weight of those words. The Sentinels were not merely weapons. They were warriors, programmed with the task of protecting their world. Yet even they seemed to understand that the humans' ingenuity would be key to turning the tide. The technology they had brought from Earth might just be their advantage. The crew quickly got to work, setting up a makeshift command center within one of the ruined buildings near the city's edge. Felix and the engineers scrambled to repurpose the alien technology they had discovered, hoping to create something that could turn the Sentinels' immense power into a strategic advantage. They needed weapons, something that could hold the line long enough for the Sentinels to engage the fleet. The first wave of the Conquerors descended upon them like a storm. Massive warships, their hulls dark and angular, cut through the sky, each one resembling a predatory beast of metal and fire. From these ships, smaller assault vessels began to drop, scattering onto the surface in fiery streaks. The humans had no chance of engaging them with conventional weapons. They were outmatched, and the Sentinels, though powerful, were not invincible. But Clara had faith in her people. Humanity had always survived against the odds, and they would do so again. "Ready the disruptors," she ordered, her voice calm despite the chaos that was unfolding. "We need to weaken their shields before the Sentinels engage." The engineers had managed to modify the technology from the alien ruins into powerful disruptor guns capable of interfering with the Conqueror ship's energy fields. Though crude compared to the advanced weapons of the invaders, it was their only chance. The first shots rang out, and the blast from the disruptors lit up the sky. For a brief moment, the invaders seemed surprised. The shields on the nearest Conqueror ships flickered and sparked, indicating that the weapons had worked. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The Conquerors had expected to dominate with sheer power, but humanity had found a way to fight back. As the invader ships struggled to regain their strength, the Sentinels sprang into action. With terrifying speed, they moved toward the incoming assault forces, their energy blades humming to life. They clashed with the invaders in an explosion of light and sound, their forms shifting and warping as they cut through the enemy with an elegance that belied their sheer destructive power. Clara and her team moved with the Sentinels, taking cover behind ruined buildings and using the terrain to their advantage. The invaders fought with brutal efficiency, their soldiers equipped with weapons that seemed to tear through the landscape. But the humans fought with tenacity, using every trick they knew, every weapon they could muster, despite the odds stacked against them. Felix worked furiously alongside the engineers, modifying the disruptors to enhance their effects, while Dr. Grant analyzed the Conqueror tactics, looking for weaknesses they could exploit. Clara's mind raced, her focus never wavering from the battlefield. She knew the humans were fighting for their lives, but something deeper burned inside her, a sense of duty to those who had awakened the Sentinels and entrusted them with this world. The first wave of invaders was crushed. The Conqueror fleet, however, was only beginning to show its full strength. More ships descended from the atmosphere, a tide of destruction that threatened to overwhelm everything. But Clara didn't hesitate. "Prepare for round 2, she said, her voice steady. "The battle's just begun." The roar of battle echoed across the ruined city as the Conqueror's forces clashed with the Sentinels. Energy beams streaked through the air, the hum of alien weapons blending with the roar of the Sentinels' energy blades. Clara watched as the towering figures moved with a speed and precision that left no room for doubt. The Sentinels were formidable, yet the invaders were relentless, their sheer numbers threatening to overwhelm them. The first wave had been repelled, but the invaders were adapting. Their ships shifted formation, and their ground forces began to regroup. The Sentinels, though powerful, were still fighting on the back foot. They were outnumbered, and the battle was turning into a brutal war of attrition. Clara clenched her jaw as she scanned the battlefield, her mind racing for a way to turn the tide. Her team had successfully disabled a few of the Conqueror ships' shields with the disruptors, but it was clear that the invaders were learning from their mistakes. The Conqueror's ships were now more heavily armored, their shields reinforcing with greater speed. The Sentinels were formidable, but they couldn't defeat an entire fleet alone. "Captain," Felix's voice crackled through her comms, breaking her concentration. "We've got a problem. The Conquerors are deploying heavier forces, specialized units. These things, they're not like the rest." Clara's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, specialized?" Felix hesitated for a moment. "They're humanoid. They look like us, but they're armored to the teeth, and they're wielding weapons that are beyond anything we've seen." The implications hit Clara like a punch to the gut. The Conquerors had weapons that could counter the Sentinels' advantage. They were adapting faster than they had anticipated. "Prepare the second wave of disruptors. We need to slow them down," Clara ordered, her voice resolute. "And tell Dr. Grant to keep analyzing their tactics. We need a weakness." As Felix moved to implement her orders, Clara turned her attention back to the battlefield. The first of the humanoid Conqueror soldiers were emerging from the wreckage of their fallen ships. They moved with a terrifying precision, their armor gleaming in the dim light, their weapons crackling with destructive energy. Unlike the rest of the invaders, these warriors were calculating, not mindlessly charging into battle. "Here they come," muttered Dr. Grant from her position at the command center, her voice tight with tension. "This is bad, Clara. They're not just fighters, they're strategists." Clara's eyes narrowed. The Conqueror's ability to adapt, to counter every move the humans made, was proving to be their greatest asset. But she wasn't about to let them win. "Send the disruptors to the front lines," she ordered. "We'll use the terrain to our advantage. The Sentinels are the key. If we can drive a wedge between their forces, we might stand a chance." The Sentinels were already engaged in fierce combat with the invader ground forces. Their massive forms moved like shadows through the destruction, cutting down enemies with brutal efficiency. But Clara knew they couldn't keep this up forever. "Captain," Felix's voice broke through the comms again, his words frantic. "They're sending in more reinforcements. The specialized units are advancing on the central hub." Clara's pulse quickened. If they didn't stop the reinforcements now, the city would fall, and the invaders would have the advantage. "Understood. All units, prepare to hold the central hub at all costs," she ordered. "Dr. Grant, We need to find the weak link in their formation. We're running out of time. Dr. Grant's eyes darted across her screen, her fingers flying over the console. She looked up, her face grim. The humanoid soldiers. They're linked to a command center. If we can take out that center, we'll sever their coordination. But it's heavily guarded. Clara's mind raced. The Conqueror's command center. If they took it out, it could disrupt the entire invader operation. But how could they reach it without being overwhelmed? I've got a plan, Felix said suddenly, his voice brimming with determination. We can use the disruptors to create a distraction. The Sentinels can clear a path, but we'll need to move quickly. Clara nodded sharply. Do it. We'll cover you. The plan was risky. They would need to move through the heart of the enemy's forces, relying on the Sentinels to carve a path while they created the distraction. But it was their best shot. The crew worked quickly, rigging the disruptors to release a powerful pulse that would disable the invaders' communications and systems momentarily. Meanwhile, the Sentinels prepared for their next charge, their weapons glowing brighter than ever. With a deafening roar, they surged forward, their massive forms moving like living storms across the battlefield. The humans followed, their disruptors blazing a path through the invader forces as they made their way toward the command center. Each step was fraught with danger, but they had no choice. The invaders were closing in on victory, and if they didn't strike now, it would all be over. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as they neared the center of the Conqueror's command, her mind set on one goal: to stop the Conquerors at all costs. The tide of battle had shifted, and now it was time for humanity to strike back. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning metal and ozone as Clara's team pushed forward through the chaos. The ground beneath their feet trembled with every impact from the energy weapons that ripped through the city. The Sentinels led the charge, their towering figures cutting a swath through the Conqueror forces, their blades and energy pulses flashing with deadly precision. But the invaders were relentless. For every soldier the Sentinels felled, 2 more took their place. Clara's heart pounded as they neared the Conqueror's command center. It loomed ahead, a massive structure nestled deep within the ruins of the city's heart. Its angular, obsidian walls seemed to absorb the light around it, casting long shadows that swallowed the ground. The air around it buzzed with a strange, almost oppressive energy, as if the building itself was alive. "Keep moving," Clara shouted, her voice hoarse from the smoke and debris. "We don't have much time." Felix, Dr. Grant, and the rest of the crew followed closely behind, weapons at the ready, their eyes scanning the battlefield for any signs of movement. The invaders' humanoid soldiers were closing in from all sides, their armor gleaming in the dim light. But it was the command center that mattered now. If they could destroy it, they might be able to fracture the invaders' coordination and disrupt their advance. "We're almost there," Felix said, his voice tight with effort. "Just a little farther." Suddenly, a series of explosions rang out ahead, sending shockwaves through the ground. Clara's stomach lurched as a massive armored invader emerged from the wreckage, a hulking figure nearly as tall as the Sentinels, its armor adorned with intricate symbols and glowing runes. It towered over the battlefield, its eyes locked onto Clara and her team. "Reinforcements," Dr. Grant muttered, her voice filled with dread. "That's a commander." The invader commander raised its massive weapon, something resembling a cannon fused with a plasma blade, and aimed it directly at them. The energy in the weapon began to crackle and hum, gathering power. Clara's pulse quickened. "Take cover," she shouted. The crew scattered as the invader fired, a beam of searing energy blasting through the air. Clara dove behind a ruined pillar, feeling the heat of the blast even through the debris. The ground exploded in front of her, sending rocks and dust flying in every direction. Through the smoke, she spotted the figure of the invader commander, moving toward them with chilling calmness. Its footsteps were slow but deliberate, each one causing the earth beneath it to shake. "Damn it," Clara hissed. "We can't let it get to us. The command center's too close." Felix fired his weapon, the shots ricocheting off the commander's armor with little effect. "We need something bigger," he yelled, frustration rising in his voice. Dr. Grant pulled something from her pack, a strange device she had salvaged from the alien ruins. "This should do it," she said. "I modified this to create a temporary disruptor field. It might disable its armor for a few seconds, but we'll need to make those seconds count." Clara nodded. "Let's move." They set up quickly, moving as one unit. The Sentinels, sensing the change in the tide of battle, pivoted to intercept the invader commander. Their massive forms collided with the hulking figure, their energy blades flashing. The two forces engaged in a brutal clash, sparks flying as metal met metal, energy crackling in the air. Clara's team didn't hesitate. Dr. Grant activated the disruptor field, sending a wave of crackling energy toward the commander. The armor around its chest and shoulders shimmered and flickered, and for a moment, the invader faltered, its movements slowing. "Now," Clara ordered. Felix, with a speed that surprised even himself, sprinted forward, his disruptor rifle aimed at the commander's exposed weak point. He pulled the trigger. A pulse of concentrated energy tore through the air, striking the invader commander square in the chest. The impact caused a massive explosion of sparks and a burst of energy, knocking the creature off its feet. The commander crumpled to the ground, its armor groaning as it began to crack. The Sentinels wasted no time, descending upon it with brutal efficiency. In mere moments, the invader commander was nothing more than a broken pile of armor and twisted metal. "We're in," Clara said, her voice tinged with exhaustion, but also relief. "Now we push for the command center." They made a final sprint toward the heart of the enemy's position, the sound of the ongoing battle echoing in their ears. The invader forces, disoriented by the fall of their commander, seemed to falter for a brief moment. The Sentinels pressed the advantage, tearing through the invaders with renewed vigor. The disruptors and weapons provided by the humans were proving effective, but it was the raw power of the Sentinels that kept the invaders from rallying. As they approached the command center, Clara could feel the air around them grow heavier, more oppressive. The building's dark, alien architecture seemed to hum with an energy all its own. The battle raged around them, but Clara's focus was laser-sharp now. The command center was within reach. She knew that if they didn't succeed here, the invaders would crush them. This was their one chance to turn the tide. The future of the world, and perhaps the galaxy, depended on it. The time to act had come. And nothing, not even the conquerors, would stop them. Clara's pulse raced as she stood before the massive obsidian doors of the conqueror's command center. The entire structure seemed to hum with an eerie energy, its smooth, angular surfaces absorbing every bit of light. The air felt thick, charged with something unnatural, as if the building itself were alive. The ground trembled beneath their feet, a stark reminder that the conquerors were relentless. Yet, for the first time since the battle had begun, Clara felt the faintest flicker of hope. "Ready?" she asked, her voice firm, but a flicker of uncertainty danced in her eyes. Felix nodded, checking the disruptor weapon one final time. "Let's do this." Behind them, the Sentinels, still locked in fierce combat with the invaders, made their way toward the entrance of the command center, clearing a path. Clara could hear the sounds of battle behind them, the roars of the Sentinels, the sharp crackle of plasma rifles, the explosions that rattled the ground. But her mind was fixed on one singular task: getting inside. "Once we breach this, we'll need to plant the disruptor charges at key points within the system," Dr. Grant said, her voice steady despite the overwhelming pressure. "The command center's eye is the nerve center of the invaders' operations. If we overload it, we'll cripple their ability to coordinate. But it's not going to be easy." "No one said it would be," Clara replied. She turned to the team, looking each member in the eye. "We go in together, we come out together. No one gets left behind." "Understood." "Understood," they responded in unison. With a determined look, Clara stepped forward and activated the entrance control. The massive doors groaned open, revealing a darkened interior. The moment they crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped, and the air felt thick with an unnatural stillness. Their footsteps echoed in the silence, and Clara's instincts screamed that they were not alone. "Stay sharp," she whispered, her voice barely audible. They moved cautiously through the vast corridors, the walls lined with dark, organic-looking material that pulsed faintly. The architecture was unlike anything they'd seen before, twisting, alive, as though the entire structure was one colossal organism. Strange symbols, glowing softly with an eerie, otherworldly light, marked the walls. The more Clara looked at them, the more they seemed to shift, rearranging themselves in patterns too complex to comprehend. It was clear that the Conquerors had designed this place to be far more than a simple command center. It was a fortress, a nerve center designed to bend reality itself. "This is it," Dr. Grant said suddenly, her voice sharp as she pointed to a large, pulsating core at the center of the room. The AI. Clara realized. It was massive, the size of a small building, glowing with a strange energy. It seemed to breathe, a slow pulse of light that sent a chill down her spine. Felix quickly moved to set the charges. "We don't have much time," he said, his hands working with precision despite the tension. The countdown had already begun outside, as the Sentinels continued to fight off invader reinforcements. The invaders would realize what they were up to soon. The human forces were growing weaker with each passing minute. Dr. Grant took a step toward the core, her face focused. "I need a moment to interface with it. This will give us a window to plant the disruptor charges and initiate the overload." Clara nodded. "We're counting on you, Grant." But as Dr. Grant connected the portable device she had been working on to the core's interface panel, something went wrong. The pulsating light of the core flared brighter. The air around them vibrated with an almost magnetic force. The walls began to warp, twisting as if they were made of liquid. The command center was fighting back. "They're activating a defensive protocol," Dr. Grant gasped, pulling away from the interface. "It's locking us out." Before Clara could respond, a low growl echoed from the far side of the room. From the shadows, a figure stepped forward. Another invader commander, this one taller and even more heavily armored than the one they had encountered earlier. The armor gleamed black, with sharp, jagged edges, and a series of glowing red lines streaked across its chest, pulsing with lethal intent. Clara's heart skipped. This was different. This wasn't just a soldier. It was an enforcer, a hunter, a being made for the sole purpose of eliminating threats like them. The figure's glowing red eyes locked onto Clara, and in a voice that was both mechanical and chillingly human, it spoke. "You have done well to come this far, but your journey ends here. This world belongs to the Conquerors." Felix raised his weapon, but the commander's voice stopped him cold. "You will never succeed. You cannot stop what is inevitable." The commander's massive weapon, a hybrid of plasma and arc energy, whirred to life in its hands, charging up with a hum that resonated through the room. Clara didn't hesitate. "Grant, go. We need to buy you time." Dr. Grant nodded, already working furiously on the interface again. Felix and Clara squared off against the invader commander, their weapons drawn. The tension in the room was suffocating. The final battle was upon them. But Clara's resolve hardened. They had come too far to fail now. The Conquerors would not take this world, not while humanity still stood. And as the first blast of energy from the invader commander's weapon lit up the room, Clara knew that the final push had begun. The Conquerors would fall, or they would die trying. The room exploded into chaos as the invader commander unleashed a blast of arc energy that sent a shockwave through the command center. Clara and Felix barely managed to dive behind cover, their ears ringing from the blast. The walls cracked, the air shimmered with heat, and sparks flew from the shattered consoles. The oppressive hum of the command center intensified, as if the very heart of the Conqueror's operation had awakened to protect itself. "Grant!" Clara shouted over the roar of the explosion, her voice sharp with urgency. How long? Dr. Grant's fingers flew across the interface, her face bathed in the eerie glow from the core. Just a few more seconds. Keep him busy. Felix was already on his feet, firing a steady stream of blasts at the advancing commander. The shots hit the invader's armor, but barely seemed to slow its advance. The commander was a towering force, its weapon crackling with energy as it raised it to strike again. Clara, we need to take him down now. Felix shouted as he dodged another blast, narrowly avoiding being caught by the weapon's destructive force. Clara's mind raced. They needed a way to breach the commander's defenses. She couldn't just rely on their weapons. No, they needed something more. She turned to the Sentinels, who were still engaged in brutal combat outside the command center. The Sentinels had been the key to keeping the invaders at bay. But now it was clear that only something more formidable could challenge the commander. Felix, follow my lead, Clara yelled, her eyes locked on the commander. We're going in. With a swift motion, Clara leaped from cover, rushing directly toward the commander. The invader raised its weapon in anticipation, but Clara was faster. She dove to the side at the last second, narrowly avoiding the blast, and rolled to her feet in a smooth motion. Felix followed her lead, sprinting ahead with reckless determination. The commander swung its weapon in a wide arc, but Clara was already behind it, her blade humming to life as she slashed at its exposed side. Sparks flew as the blade scraped against the commander's armor, leaving a deep gouge. Felix fired his weapon directly at the joint between the commander's chest and arm, hoping to find a weak point. But the commander's response was swift. It spun, knocking Clara off her feet with a brutal swipe of its armored arm. She crashed into the ground, the air knocked out of her lungs. Felix tried to get closer, but the commander's weapon crackled to life, and he barely dodged another blast. This is impossible, Clara muttered to herself, struggling to stand. But then, something changed. There was a low rumble beneath her feet, and the hum of the core seemed to intensify. Grant! Clara shouted again, her voice nearly drowned by the noise. How much longer? Dr. Grant's voice cut through the chaos. It's done. The room shuddered as the core's energy field destabilized. The ground beneath them rumbled violently, and a crackling energy pulse shot out from the heart of the command center, momentarily blinding Clara. She shielded her eyes as the pulse spread, flooding the room with a bright, intense light. The invader commander stumbled, its movements suddenly sluggish. Clara knew this was their chance. Now, Felix, she shouted. Felix didn't hesitate. He surged forward with a renewed sense of purpose, firing his weapon at the commander's weakened armor. The disruptor blasts hit the invader's joints, and with a final, explosive shot, the commander's armored exterior cracked open, revealing the pulsating, mechanical heart within. Clara acted without thinking. She sprang forward, leaping onto the commander's back, and plunged her blade deep into its exposed core. The invader let out a mechanical growl, the energy from its body fluctuating violently. The commander's weapon sputtered and short-circuited, its movements growing erratic. In that moment of chaos, the room seemed to still. The energy pulse continued to vibrate through the walls, but the commander was crumbling. It fell to its knees, its body convulsing as the energy field around it surged one final time before shutting down completely. The massive invader collapsed to the ground, a lifeless heap of twisted metal and circuitry. Breathing heavily, Clara slid off the commander's body, her body bruised but determined. Felix moved to her side, panting with exertion. That was too close, he said, wiping sweat from his brow. Clara glanced toward Dr. Grant, who was already disengaging the core's interface. The countdown was nearly complete. It's over, Dr. Grant said with a sigh of relief. The core's gone critical. The system's collapsing. The invaders, they won't be able to coordinate anymore. Clara nodded. We've won. But as they caught their breath, Clara felt the ground tremble once more. It wasn't over yet. The invaders had sustained heavy losses, But the final phase of their operation had only just begun. "We're not out of the woods yet," she said grimly. "Let's finish this." With the Conqueror's command center now crumbling, the Sentinels outside rallied to them, pushing the remaining invaders back. Clara's team moved to assist, fighting with the knowledge that their enemy had been broken. The invaders no longer had a leader, no longer had a plan. And now, humanity could finally strike the killing blow. The battle for the world was won, but the war, Clara knew, was far from over. The invaders would return, but next time, they would face humanity, and this time, they would not be so lucky.